Welcome back to the Pair Program. I'm your host, Tim Winkler, alongside my co-host, Mike Gruen. So Mike, not to start it off kind of heavy here, but exactly 5 years ago, this week, I was playing Golden Tee at a bar with my friends and looked up on the TV and saw Tom Hanks telling the world from Australia that he and his wife had contracted the coronavirus. And that, I think it was that same night the NBA kind of canceled all their future games, and I felt like the world kind of stopped at that moment. Can you recall where you were at that time 5 years ago?
I mean, I can take a very educated guess. No, I don't remember exactly where I was, but my guess would be that I was at work working, because that was when I was at a place where I spent many long
midnight
hours.
Oil.
Burning midnight hour. That would be my. I would hazard that guess. But no, I don't specifically remember.
It's one of those like you can pinpoint exactly. What about you guys, Jake, Gene? Do you guys recall where you were when at that moment?
I was definitely at work.
Yeah, at work too. Just working hard, man.
The next day, we all thought we would make it until Monday, but then the next day, Friday, MIT shut down, and we went home and didn't come back for
years,
a long time.
I was sitting at a bar with a bunch of active duty folks who were doing a fellowship out in the Bay Area, and it was like the end of the day. We were having, some bar snacks and drinking beers, and all of them started getting emails and text messages that they had to return to base. So I was talking to a friend of mine who was stationed in Germany, but was out in the Bay Area for the fellowship. And so it was like jumping on the first flight out, and that was it. Went home and didn't travel again for a couple of years.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, that's like that 9/11, like those are certain times where I can visualize exactly where I was at that point. Sounds like, Jake, you and I are, more of the bar guys. These guys are working hard over here.
I was working hard at the bar.
You're working hard at the bar, yeah. Networking,
Yeah, that's right.
At the time, I had a digital nomad working for me, and I'm 90% sure he and I were probably talking about the fact that he had just landed wherever he had landed. I think either Singapore or London. It was someplace. He was traveling all the time, and it was just like, I don't know what I'm going to do, because I'm locked in here.
I'm stuck.
I'm going to be stuck here for a while. I was like, all right.
Yeah, I've heard some of those horror stories back then.
Yeah.
Well, I've come a long way since then. But it's kind of good to reflect back and see where we're at today and some of the changes that's happened across industries, some fads that stuck around, some that didn't. But this is kind of like that week 5-year anniversary of when it all kind of started to unfold. But I was listening to a podcast earlier, and it came up and it made me think back, so I thought I'd bring it up. But
our neighbor actually, in like the 2 weeks, 3 weeks before the rest of us got locked down, she went viral. She was on a cruise ship, and she was, you probably remember, there was a couple cruise ships that were kind of stranded because no one would take them.
They wouldn't be able to port.
Yeah. Because, I think the cruise ship had been in Asia and was trying to come back to the US, and it was like, nope, you can't stop here. Yeah. And so she was like live tweeting, conditions on the ship while they were like stuck at sea for a couple weeks. The rest of us were still walking around, because that was before COVID had really landed here on American shores. But,
right.
Yeah, that's actually, the cruise industry is one I thought everybody thought was just going to be done for. Yeah. And, but that and travel at large, continued on, which is great. Cool. All right. Well, let's jump into a little bit about what today's episode is about, not about COVID. We're going to be diving into a pretty buzzy, often, controversial topic of dual use technology. This is a field where, innovations designed to serve both commercial and defense purposes. So a few examples of these use cases would include artificial intelligence, machine learning, advanced robotics, autonomous systems, space-based tech. So we're going to be exploring how this approach, can foster flexibility in tech development, but it also can pose unique challenges, especially if, when you're navigating this tightrope between market demands, security needs, And then oftentimes this very short runway that startups have to operate, specifically in today's market, where access to capital is more expensive and a little bit trickier to get your hands on. So joining us on the topic of dual use, we have a few experts in the field. Gene Kesselman, the director of Mission Innovation Experimentation at MIT. In addition to teaching an executive education course at MIT on dual use strategy for startups and government, Gene's held leadership positions at a number of startups, as well as an impressive military career that serves over 25 years in the United States Air Force. And then joining alongside Gene, we have Jake Chapman. Jake is the managing director at Marque Ventures, specializing in defense and dual use tech investments. And in addition, he serves as an adjunct instructor at the Rand Institute and previously served as the managing director at Army Venture Capital Corporation. And then I'll have to throw in there, Jake, that you're a great follow on LinkedIn as well. You provide a number of spicy takes, which I highly recommend you all, our listeners, check out at some point. But Gene and Jake, thank you both for joining us on the PAIR program.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having us.
For sure. All right, before we get into the weeds of the discussion, we kick things off with a fun segment called Pair Me Up. We'll go around the room, spitball a few complimentary pairings. Mike, you lead us off.
Yeah, going back to food, we're going to go with cucumbers and cream cheese. So this is inspired by this past weekend. We went out, got some bagels, and had the traditional lox and bagels. And the shop that we got it at had, in addition to the tomatoes and lettuce and capers, also put cucumbers on there. And it reminded me how much I enjoy that sort of cucumber and cream cheese combination. Cucumber sandwiches is a great little hors d'oeuvre, for parties and stuff or whatever, or snack. So going with cucumbers and cream cheese.
Yeah,
extremely British.
Not controversial. It's a popular
very
British of you.
Paired with a nice black tea.
Exactly. Yeah, very British. And my cribbage board for.
It's a refreshing snack. You're nailing it with a refreshing snack. No, I dig it. It's that time of year too. Weather's warming up. Yep. I think. Yeah, it's my wife's a big fan of that combo as well. I'll make sure I share it with her. She'll get a thrill out of it. Nice. Good stuff. All right, I'm gonna take a leap here and go with historic homes and janky doorknobs. So my wife and I, we're actually recording here from Chattanooga, Tennessee. We have a home here second home here that we rent out, but it's built in the 1930s. And anybody who's ever lived in or owned a historic home or an really old home like this, I think will appreciate this pairing. So yeah, it's got great charm. And I love that it kept a lot of the original hardware, like these old glass doorknobs, but it's one of those small reminders, in your day to day, every time I open or close a door, this knob will just fall apart. So it reminds me of that scene, and it's a Wonderful Life where George Bailey always grabs that loose banister knob at the top of the stairwell, always comes off in his hand, and he just wants to kind of hurl it. But I love the charm, but it's also just a good reminder of the reality. This is a 1930s home, and the hardware's old as hell. So that's my pairing. I'll pass it along at this point. So Gene, quick intro and your pairing.
You want me to do an intro of myself or an intro to my pairing?
Intro yourself and then your pairing.
Well, you kind of covered it. I teach at MIT. I run a few centers here. Air Force officer, immigrant to the country. That pretty much covers most of it. My pairing. I thought about this a little bit, and I thought I might as well go super wonky, and for the purposes of the topic of this discussion, so I went with dilutive and non-dilutive capital, which is super lame, but it's the only thing I can think of.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So, and for a better pairing, I thought of because I taught a class for an accelerator at Harvard last night, and there's an MIT Harvard National Security Conference coming up in the beginning of April. And I thought people should know about. So my second pairing is MIT and Harvard. So we'll go with that one too.
There you go.
I dig it.
It's tough to argue with either of those.
Topical if nothing else.
Yeah, we have a venture partner here, so I'm sure the dilutive and non-dilutive funding one will resonate as well. On that note, Jake, quick intro and your pairing.
Yeah, Jake Chapman, managing director at Marque Ventures. We invest in early stage companies building tech that's relevant to national security. Lawyer early in my life, try very hard not to practice law. But once your partners find out that you were a lawyer at some point in time, contracts just end up in your inbox and people have just quick questions. I assume it's like when you're a doctor and everyone's trying to show you their moles, it's like, right, bro, there's a reason I don't do this anymore. Because I wasn't good. That's why you don't want me as a lawyer. All right. So to Gene's point, I've never been to the Harvard MIT conference, but I've got an East Coast partner, so he's always the one that goes and raves about it. So I feel like I'm always missing out.
Should come. This is the year.
I know. I need to make it happen. All right. So my pairing is stage 1, wife and daughter are out of town. Stage 2 is I get to watch old war movies. Yeah, without being made fun of as a stereotypical middle-aged man. So Hunt for Red October and a glass of bourbon, definitely up there. Maybe Fury, another great one.
Nice.
Maverick, right? Like that's not an old war movie. It's a new one, but it's solid.
Yeah,
solid.
I love it. In fact, I had a similar pairing at one point, which was, house to myself, wife and daughter are gone. And I was getting into like hardcore documentaries. Like that's my thing. It's just like no distractions and you can just be glued to it versus like, asking questions like, what's going on here? What are you watching? Just like, no, I got to be in it. So I can feel you on the war movies for sure. I mean, you gotta be sucked into it. And so it's tough to do that if there's any sort of distractions.
Oh yeah. I binged the Wyatt Earp like docudrama on Netflix not that long ago.
That was
really good. It definitely got made fun of for watching that one. I was like, no, you guys go to bed. I'll be up in a couple hours.
Yeah. Keep that to yourself. Yeah. Good stuff. All right. Love it. Pretty exciting new pairings that I think we haven't touched on before. So love to see that. And then again, really excited to have you guys join us. Appreciate it and excited to dive into a little bit more on the topic. So let's kind of pivot again into the heart of today's episode. So like I mentioned earlier, we're going to discuss dual use technology. I can tell you firsthand too. I mean, that's in the last 3 to 4 years on our podcast alone, this topic comes up countless times, and every time it does, we have folks who are very passionate and oftentimes maybe one-sided on the subject. I mean, like they're either a big fan of it, supportive, building for diverse customer base, or they're a little dismissive of the concept and believe it can be a distraction and maybe sometimes detrimental to a founder's focus. And then there's this dual use, I'm sure you guys hear it all the time of almost like this chicken or the egg dilemma of, should it be commercial use case and then transition to a defense application or vice versa. So everyone's, got an opinion on this stuff. I'm pumped to have you all, and kind of this more well-rounded perspective that you will bring to the conversation. So the way I kind of see the conversation flowing, have both of you guys speak your piece on the subject. We'll talk about some of the opportunities, some of the challenges, and then, some recommendations on where the future of the space might be going. I want to begin with you, Gene. Now that you've done a ton of research on the subject, and as a result, you guys at MIT are working to help better solve the dual use pitfalls that many startups tend to make. So maybe give a quick overview on the work that you're doing and how are you navigating these founders that are coming through the program?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for that lead in. Excuse me. Well, so I guess it goes back probably to when I joined MIT. I came in outside. I've never worked in academia before. I got hired out of working on a startup and going to business school here. And everything I was focused on, I was the director of the innovation initiative here at the Innovation Center. Everything I was focused on was internal facing, MIT, how to make innovation work better here, everything like that. So for the first time, probably in my adult life, I had nothing to do with the defense or national security or anything. And that was great. It was super interesting, but all of this stuff just kept following me up here. So all of my networks, because I've been in for so long, there's lots of people that were interested in working with MIT, and I was, a conduit to that. And so just by pure demand saying, no, we had to basically set up a center or start a program to just meet and talk to all these different government groups and startups that wanted to work with defense and all this sort of stuff, because there's just too much inbound interest. And that's why I did hire people and things like that, which kind of evolved into a curriculum, right? Because, at some point you can't just one-off tell people, have meetings with people and explain to them, well, this is how, this is how this works. And this is what SBIR is and all this sort of stuff. And, let's build a class, let's build something for people to kind of enjoy en masse or take part in en masse. So we built a 2-day curriculum for dual use. And that was 5 years ago. And just by, nature of the niche, we were one of the first to teach it formally and create a curriculum and a pedagogy around it. And it became really popular. And this is when, the convergence was happening with dual use. It was still early though. And then NATO came along and started Diana. And it happened to be that we were one of the few people in the world that were teaching dual use. And so we became the NATO Diana curriculum provider, and I taught the dual use introduction class. And that just kind of opened the floodgates. And now it's like this fundamental part of our work here is to help startups, particularly those that are commercially focused that have never worked with the government or defense or mission. Those are the kind of the best, but certainly those that also have dabbled, to really understand how to engage and become a dual use strategy company. And that's one of the foundational aspects of our thesis, is that dual use is a strategy. It's not a sector. It's not a category. We've written extensively on it. In fact, the article we wrote, the reason I thought Jake would be a great pairing here is because we wrote an article for War on the Rocks on the topic. And just out of respect and also to poke a little bit, we quoted Jake in our article because he said he took the opposite viewpoint. Not opposite. He took a different viewpoint. I think probably 80% covariant on most things. There's some things in there that we kind of didn't we took convergent perspectives on.
Wait, Jake had a spicy take on something you're saying?
No. I like to just repeat what everyone else has already said.
He started it. Yeah, he started it is what I'm saying. I didn't. I'm not judging. I'm just saying he started it.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's kind of where we are on that side of it. And then on the other side, that's kind of the startup side. And on the other side, we work, like as I mentioned, with NATO through the Diana program and with Special Operations Command, SOCOM. We built a class with them at MIT as well, where they come and engage directly with students on design build curriculum, where we have this year we have way oversubscribed class, too many students. We had to kind of actually cut it down. And they break up into teams and they take hard problems that SOCOM provides and they build solutions to them. And I think that's a super, super cool. One of my favorite things to do is teach that class. So that's where we're coming from. That's we have a very strong position. It's not. I don't think it's controversial. Is that any company that has anything even relatively resembling a capability for defense or government should at least look at the options for non-dilutive funding and for customers inside the government as a way to continue building the product in the company.
And I'm obviously going to build on a little bit of that article that Jake wrote, because I think there's some things to pick at there as well that are super relevant to the conversation. But for our listeners, the NATO Diana, is this a dual use accelerator? Their dual use technology accelerator? Is that right?
So Diana is NATO's accelerator program. So they basically, it's pretty audacious, to be honest with you. I'm very impressed that they did this, as well as the sister program is the NATO Innovation Fund, which is a legit VC fund that NATO started, and the LPs are the NATO countries. Not all of them, but a good portion of them. The U.S. is not one of them, actually, to be honest. But the Diana program is their accelerator network, and what they do is they do a call for startups around these different categories, these problem areas, and then startups are assigned to now 13 different accelerator sites across the NATO footprint.
Oh.
And so we developed like the curriculum that the accelerators teach to the startups, and then I teach the intro to dual use class for those guys.
Cool.
So that really took what was like a niche, right? Like a lot of people interested in it growing, but still, fairly niche into like now, to the scale of NATO, Europe, and North America. It's really been a huge enabler for us.
Yeah, I want to build a little bit more on this framework that you all kind of came up with. But before we do so, I'm going to jump over to Jake real quick. So yeah, Gene kind of referenced it. You wrote a little bit of a spicy piece a few years ago on War on the Rocks that was titled "Reliance on Dual Use Technology is a Trap." So what sparked you to put that piece out there, and what were you seeing in the market that motivated you to speak on the subject?
Yeah, I mean, I like to look at the predominant narratives and then ask myself, how are these narratives wrong? Because I think that they often are, but very few people poke at the things that become fairly dogmatic. And dual use, or the importance of dual use, or the need to be a dual use company, was definitely, and still is, the dominant narrative in folks who are investing in defense. And it's also the dominant narrative for how the Defense Department thinks it should be working with companies. So I started thinking about it, and the first aha moment, the first thing that occurred to me was the actual narrative that the department puts out there. I've heard it explicitly expressed, but it's often implicit, is what we want you to build a commercial product first, because we want you to have plenty of commercial revenue such that you can survive working through our processes. And I said, well, that's an interesting thing to say, right? Because what you're doing is you are acknowledging that you're a bad customer, that your processes suck, and that your customers or your vendors might not survive working with you. And so rather than say, aha, I need to look internally and like fix my processes, what you have said is let someone else get you along, and then, you'll muddle through and work with us. Right. And I was like, that's messed up, right? This is a Band-Aid. It's not an actual fix. But I didn't really have much more to the thesis yet. I was like, but this is definitely means that we should be thinking more about, is dual use, is the narrative around dual use the right narrative? And so I started thinking more and more about it. And I realized that there were a bunch of reasons why that particular iteration of dual use was problematic. And so I think the biggest ones are the two biggest. I mean, I think in the article I list out like 6 different reasons, and I've since expanded on a little bit in my own mind, although I haven't published. But if you're looking at dual use technology from the government perspective, or as an American patriot, or someone who just wants us to have a strong national defense, and the narrative is build something in for commercial industry first and then take it to the Department of Defense, what you are doing is you are saying, you start on day 0 with an interesting technology. In year 5, 6, 7, once you found product market fit, now you can come and build out the product team and the sales team and start working for defense. And I think that worked in the 90s and 2000s when we were decades ahead of our competition and we were, fighting in Afghanistan or Iraq. I don't think that works when the predominant adversary is China, who is ahead of us in some technology areas and slightly behind us in others, but we can't build in a 5 or 10 year capability gap. Like, we have to actually be trying to put our best tech forward on day 1. And that means we can't be commercial first dual use unless we're just willing to accept defeat. So that was from the patriotic side, I think that's the best argument to not rely on dual use. From the investor side, it was just like, actually, this is early stage. This is more about sequencing. No early stage company can afford to actually be dual use in my mind. I shouldn't say no. There's always like the rare exception, right? But 99% of the time, the thing you are building it will be slightly different for the Department of Defense or very different. It's rare if it's pure COTS. I do the thing, I can sell it to each person. Right? I make duct tape, I can sell duct tape to the Army, I can sell duct tape to Home Depot. Mm-hmm. Very rare for that. And so what that means is you need 2 product teams, 2 engineering teams. More importantly, you need 2 sales teams. The sales motion for B2G is so different from B2C or B2B. It's not the same people, and no company with a $2 million seed round can actually afford to be dual use. When you go raise your Series B, if you started in the commercial markets, you started in the defense markets, like now's the time to start opening up new markets. And I think that's actually, that aspect is where Gene and I agree most, is it's about, if you are going to be dual use, do it in series, not in parallel most of the time. And, Gene's rubric is really about, I think, helping companies figure out what is the right time to shift gears. And for us, we just think about it as stage, but he's got a little bit more granular take.
Yeah. And I really liked the way Gene put it as it's a strategy, because I think having been through from the late 90s in the 2000s, working in a lot of companies that were doing dual use and seeing it work in different ways, because I was at different stage companies, that it was really about sequencing. And I think the notion of putting it as a strategy lets you then say, like, because what I experienced at any number of companies was a push and pull. Like these 2 things were working against each other. And so when you have that, it's combative as opposed to collaborative or whatever you want to call it. And so sort of putting it under a strategy makes a lot more sense. Like, hey, we're going to do this, and then this is how we're going to expand it. And I really like that notion. I'd love to hear more sort of about that.
Jake, I thought your piece was intriguing. I like how you broke down into like these, 4 different categories of dual use, like commercial, defense, and so forth. And I do want to kind of piggyback on almost like the tiers or like the series of the growth. Gene, you kind of put together like the readiness level framework. Can you expand on that and kind of build on like a little bit of what Jake's speaking on how you all are, molding from the beginning on how to best, grow and do it sustainably?
Yeah. I will disagree a little bit with what Jake said in that I don't think, or maybe I'll say it in the positive. We've seen many examples, dozens, if not hundreds of examples of startups and companies that before like the Series A or B have been able to navigate what we believe would be a dual use strategy. So I do think they're capable of doing it. I don't think you need multiple sales teams. I think there are levels of the engagement with the government that I think that's the core of it is that between our positions is what are we actually talking about when we're saying dual use, like going and getting a phase 1 SBIR and then never coming back to work with government again. That's a dual use strategy. That's one way to do it. And then there's much more involved ways to do it. So I've seen enough.
We definitely disagree there, right? Like I would say that's not dual use. That's leveraging a government program. And as an investor, which we both are, it's great when your companies get non-dilutive money, right? But then as an American, I would say, man, that doesn't feel great. Like my taxpayer dollars went to the SBIR program that's being directed by the Department of Defense. And while you can hack it for non-dilutive funding, do we actually want, as taxpayers, companies saying, yeah, I'm going to build a defense product, you should give me this grant, and then never having the intent to go back, right?
Well, that's kind of like we've all heard of like SBIR mills, right? And I don't know if that's what we're really talking about, or if that's an example.
Yeah, well, I don't think we're talking about SBIR mills. I think everybody agrees that you should actually have some kind of purpose to pursuing. Mm-hmm. But let me just rewind on that point then for a few minutes before we move on. I get the opportunity to teach in many different countries on this fact. Our 40-year now long SBIR law, right? This was a law that was enacted in 1984. 1983, 84, early 80s, that requires every government organization with $100 million or more budget to put aside 3.4% of their budget towards small business set aside that has, you have to have less than 500 people in the company, et cetera, et cetera. That is the cheat code for the rest of the world. I mean, there's no European, no Asian, nobody else in the world allows small businesses to engage with the government in a way that we do. It is absolutely our superpower. It is, yes, of course, of that 3.4% of a government agency's budget, there will be companies that take it, develop their technology, and then go and do nothing with the government for the rest of their life. But remember, the phase one with any agency in the U.S. government allows you to now sole source to the government based on that specific technology chain going forward at any point. So that vehicle, the ability for a startup, a person that is building something on their own without the advantages of all these different huge system integrators and everything else, someone that's really being innovative to directly engage with the government, to talk directly with someone in the Air Force and the NSF and the NIH, build something for a capability for them, engage with them, and then decide is our superpower. Nobody else in the world, everybody else wishes they had programs like this. We've had it for 40 years. And so I think one of the prices you pay for that is that you cannot optimize for the perfect, right? You can't possibly create a system where every single company that gets a phase one with every single agency will then continue to a phase three and build a product. That's not going to happen. I don't think we want that to happen. I think what we end up building is an industrial base of startups and people that have worked with the government, engaged directly with the mission, engaged directly with the user, and those are the future companies that will be working to support us. And so it's very clear cut in my eyes. Like I've seen everywhere else, and they all wish they were us. And it's like I think it was Churchill. I can't remember who gets credit for this. I believe it's Churchill said, it's the worst system in the world except for all the others. This is 100% is the case for ours. Like SBIR is not perfect, but it is by far the best system out there for direct engagement with the government.
So I guess I'm curious in terms of the framework that you've stood up, Gene. What is it that you're guiding them on? Are there some core principles that you're helping them to navigate? And then if they are going down the path of obtaining a SBIR, are there designated steps towards expanding on that, or is it more around the capital is here now? Let's talk about how we use this toward both sides.
Yeah. So let's. I don't want to exaggerate the usefulness of a model in any case. Like, we're in academia, so we're contractually obligated to build models and do stuff like this. But I think it's useful in the very early stages to understand context and where you sit in the world, and then try to paint a linear path along these different axes that you should use as a very general framework, right? That's all this is. I'm starting out here. I don't know what my mission customer is. I don't know what my commercial funding options are. I'm at commercial funding readiness level 1. I can read 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I kind of know where I should be going in general. And then the same with those 4 other readiness levels. That is what that tool does. Like it provides a baseline understanding and a language and a lexicon. And we're actually building an AI tool to accompany it because, again, we can't answer every inquiry in scale. So if you want to know a little bit more about CFRL 3, we're training a model to basically be able to kind of dig deep and explain to you based upon your particular company what that might mean, where you might want to go looking for potential customers or funding. So it's a model. I think it's a good model, but models, academic models and things like that certainly have very, very strong limitations, and they don't really, there's no way to represent the real world, but you can get a good estimation.
I want to build on Jake, something that you pointed out in your piece, which I think is super relevant and timely in what's going on in today's kind of government ecosystem. But it sounds to me like a part of that was solving, the defense challenges by enhancing like the DoD's role as a customer. Could you kind of build on like what you're leaning into there in terms of what you're hoping, might come by way of some of the changes that are happening across the ecosystem at large right now?
Sure. Yeah. So those of us who like to criticize the system, we all do it with love, right? We just want it to be better. Most of the folks in that class, right? Like it's all my friends. And so I feel like everyone does, but then I'm like, no, it's just like the echo chamber I'm in. Almost everyone criticizes the acquisition system. See, this is me trying to be spicy again. And I actually think that there's three parts to how the DoD buys things, or like three main muscle movements. There's the acquisitions process, which is like contracting and like managing contracts. There's the requirements process, the main one of which is called JSIDs, but there's like several ways to run those traps. And then the third one is the PPB process. So it's budgeting. So it's actually moving money through Congress to the programs. Everyone complains about acquisitions because that's where rubber meets the road for industry for the most part. The other two processes happen behind the scenes, although are at least as important as acquisitions in terms of like whether or not your company will ever be successful. So everyone complains about acquisitions. In fact, I think acquisitions are the most fixed of the three. The requirements process and the budgeting process are profoundly broken. And the thing that's weird about the acquisitions process is it's not that they've fixed the core acquisition processes, but that Congress has made so many hacks and workarounds to the acquisitions process that the core acquisition process, which is managed by the FAR, the Federal Acquisition Regulations, and the DFARS, the defense supplement to that. There's so many hacks that you actually don't even need to use the core process anymore. For instance, the biggest hack is probably OTAs or CSOs, which is what DIU pushes money through. In theory, those don't even need to be competed if you can write a justification for why they don't. If you do need to compete them, a phase one SBIR, as Gene said, can be used as your competition justification. You can put $500 million through those contracts without a competition, and you can do it in a matter of a couple months. That's a fixed process if you just want to use the hacks. The real challenges that exist today are still in requirements, and that's where the government runs the bureaucratic process where they officially recognize they have a problem they need to solve and they need to put money behind solving it. And that process can take several years. And then obviously, budgeting, I think you've probably talked with other folks about at some point. But, we are in the process, I think, right now, the DoD is in the process of creating their next 5-year plan, like a nice communist organization would, that kicks off, I think, in 2027. So they're like planning today for what they want to buy for like 2032 or something, right? And you just can't. It's an impossibility because they don't know what the world's going to look like in 2030. They don't know what companies are going to exist. It's very hard for them to have flexibility once those budgets pass. So, what was your original question? I've gone off on a total tangent here, but that's what I'm thinking about.
Yeah. No, that's kind of what I was leaning to. Like, what are you
the government
hoping for? Yes, like what kind of change are you hoping for that's most needed, given what we've seen over the last 20, 30 years or whatnot.
So requirements reform is supposed to be happening right now. I think that's happening very slowly. The PPBE reform commission happened a year ago, 2 years ago. Their recommendations have all come through. Some of those are getting picked up, but nowhere near enough changes happening there. So like maybe Doge at some point will get a hold of it. Although I suspect that Doge will go back to acquisitions and try and fix acquisitions first, because that's, again, probably where they're hearing the most complaint, even if it's the most solved of the three.
Yeah, Gene, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this in terms of what you're hoping for in terms of reform or change.
I think there's some really interesting reforms coming through Congress right now. Our good friend Warren Katz and the Alliance is trying to push through, an evolved SBIR kind of reform and improvement, which will actually eliminates the kind of SBIR mill concept, or the capability that we talked about a little earlier. Increase the mandatory pool, and institute a TAC-FI, STRAT-FI kind of model for everybody to use. And so I think that sounds like a great idea. It sounds like it's very likely to pass. It's got a lot of support, bipartisan support. And then everybody is proposing that this is the time to start throwing stuff at the wall to see what sticks in DC, because I'm not sure there's anyone at the wheel right now. I think it's just pure chaos. So it's a good time to try to push through some change because people are a little distracted over here. But I guess I can't underscore this idea enough and I'm all with Jake on this. I mean, everybody's been criticizing the acquisition process, and we certainly do have a million different workarounds, and they're getting basically codified now. I mean, it's coming out the fact that OTAs might be more popular than FAR regulations at this point by the way that they're getting pushed everywhere. I want to underscore how much better our system is, and it's only in that context that I fear that we're trying to fix something that isn't perfect, right? And it is not perfect, but it was developed to be slow and cumbersome and avoid fraud, waste, and abuse, right? Because that's at the era where the FAR was developed. That's what everyone was afraid of. So it is not a model for the time, but that doesn't mean that it is not still better than everything else out there, and that we don't have any proof. And this is my warning. We don't have any proof that if we break it, it's going to work better and be more effective. But we have pretty good proof that by using it as a foundation and doing the things that we do to kind of work around the edges and do the best we can, and now evolving it, it's a pretty good system. And I'm just worried that we tend to always fall back to let's burn it to the ground. And in this case, I can tell you there's nothing out there better for us to model if we burn it to the ground and start over.
Yeah, something that comes to mind for us, just kind of growing up in this area, and we've dealt a lot with talent and recruiting, specifically for starting with government contracting shops and then leading into more commercial product startup environments. And one of the things that we've seen is there's obviously a difference there when you look at engineers that may have been building in large 5-10 year contract environments versus product engineers that are building something that's really quick and shipping more frequently and rapidly. And so what I see a lot of transition happening here is, and it's almost an entire system that they're trying to kind of poke holes at. But I went digging down a rabbit hole, and an article that jumped out to me was something written by Trey Stevens, who's one of the co-founders of Anduril, which is called Innovation Deficit: Why DC is Losing Silicon Valley. And this was written back in 2016, but I think it still stands true today, because largely the way that government acquires software is with this labor-based button seats model. And that doesn't always account for individual exceptionalism, if you will. And so I pulled a piece of this article. I'll read it verbatim because I think it's interesting, and I'd like to hear, Mike, what your thoughts are on this, but also, Jake and Gene, if something comes to mind. But it says the average request for proposal, RFP, involving software development services requires estimates on count of full-time equivalents, FTEs, who will be engaged in the effort, a basis of estimate, modeling, FTEs, their labor categories, and the FTE blend deployed against RFP requirements and delivery dates. Requirement X needs 2.5 engineers for 6 months to complete. This process massively disadvantages efficient and more talented teams because the talent gap between average and excellent is so large. It would generally be better to have one LeBron level coder than to have 100 average ones. Obviously, this guy's a fan of LeBron James, but this. What comes to mind when you hear this excerpt, Jake?
Yeah, I mean, he's mostly talking about cost plus contracting, right? I mean, specifically in the software dimension. So
in software,
the department has been not great at acquiring software. There's new policy in place as of 2 or 3 days ago, or 3 or 4 days ago, trying to move this to smarter software acquisitions, more firm fixed price. I'll generalize it though, and I'll just talk about cost plus, right? So the DoD likes to buy things on cost plus fixed fee, CPFF, which means that you, the company, have to track all of your expenses, and it's extremely complicated. Startups can't do it, or if you do it, it's a huge expense, takes years to set up the right systems. And then the department will pay you your costs plus a fixed profit margin. And so that margin is fixed at, let's say, 8%. Usually it's 8 to 12 or something like that. It's relatively low, which does a couple things. One, it means that no venture-backed startup is ever going to do fixed fee if they can avoid it, because that's not what their investors paid them to do. They're not paid to make 10% margin on what they do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Two, it means that the incentive structure is to generate more costs. The more costs you generate, the higher your top line and the more your executives get paid. Totally broken. So why do we have a totally broken cost plus fixed fee system? The thesis that the department had when these first came about was we need Lockheed or Martin Marietta or whoever at the time to build a system that they have no idea how to build, and it will, be lasers and rockets and whatever, right? Very complicated. No private company can take that risk on or is willing to take that risk on. So we're going to hire them to do it, but we, the government, are going to assume all of the development risk. That's why we pay you your costs plus a fixed margin. Because we're going to take all the risk, I'm not going to let you make 80% margins, right? That's a fair trade.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is that the government really started to like that contracting model, and so they've applied it in a lot of other places. So I would say cost plus makes sense for some things still. If you are building the next stealth aircraft or space laser sort of missile defense system, you're going to invest billions of dollars in doing it. It might make sense to be cost plus. If you are trying to work with startups and you want like small attritable systems,
Mm-hmm.
You should be doing fixed fee. Like let them make whatever margin they want and drive costs as low as they can and just deliver the best capability for the best cost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well said. Gene, anything to add on to that? I mean, again, this is more geared towards the software side of things, but I think that's a lot of the areas that we've focused in on predominantly has been software, and it's been really challenging to see any of that change in the last several years.
This is one area where Jake and I completely agree. And he did mention that Pete Hegseth's put out a memo like 2 days ago that basically said we're going to change the way we acquire software to, I believe he said, maximize lethality, which is an interesting combination of ideas.
Very spacey software.
Very intense.
Yeah. Yes. So I think I don't have any divergence from here from Jake's point. In that the acquisition model, the reimbursement model has to
Mm-hmm.
be fixed, because we are just rapidly, just falling into a world where exquisite systems will not be able to be sustained. There will be such a asymmetry in cost in warfare that if you're building aircraft carriers that can get taken out by $700 speedboat with some explosives strapped to it, you can no longer afford to focus those kind of on those systems for warfare, and so you're going to have to figure out how to buy huge, flexible, adaptable, expendable systems in enormous quantities, and operate them with software, safe, secure, unspoofable, unjammable software. And so that's the world. There's no doubt that's the world we're going for, and our system right now will not be able to sustain those kind of acquisitions. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where a little bit of a changing of the guards with some of these big primes is going to be already starting to see with the likes of like Anduril and Palantir. But I guess in closing, any final thoughts on the dual use? We'll transition here into a final segment called 5 Second Scramble. But any closing remarks before we wrap it up?
I mean, I've thought, since I wrote that article, I have tried to, in my mind, build a deeper ontology for dual use. I haven't written about this yet, but I've decided that actually, so the commercial first, sort of commercial second, commercial first defensive, like the way that I built it out in the article is actually only one quadrant of like the bigger dual use bucket. And I think today we always talk about dual use of outputs. So is the widget you build useful for industry, and is it also useful for defense? But actually the the original dual use bucket was dual use of inputs. It was Freedom's Forge. It was can your factory build cars and tanks, right? It was your capital equipment, your capital investment. And then we don't talk enough these days about dual use of inputs and maybe optimizing industry to be flippable in a mobilization scenario. And that's a underinvested in aspect of dual use, and like the one that's maybe it's not easy, but it's like the easiest to get behind. And then the third category that I'm trying to think through is dual use of outcomes, which is extremely spicy. And I'll give you an example that's not a good practical example, but if I own a cobalt mine in Africa and then the largest other cobalt mine is in South America, and someone were to blow up the cobalt mine in South America, and that was a Chinese-owned mine, then I, as the private actor, am now doing really well with my African mine. And we've had a national security benefit. And so, like, what are the ways in which just industry operating as industry and government operating as government can hand in hand drive positive outcomes? Anyway, that's what I'm ruminating on in dual use these days.
It's interesting because you're that other example, the different inputs. That was my first experience in dual use. We had a natural language processing engine. The commercial use was voice of the customer. How is my product being received? How do we ingest Twitter and do all this? My side, the Fed side, we were using it for finding bad actors. It was, left of boom. Let's analyze all of these documents and cables, all this other stuff, and try and figure out like what led to this bad event. And then use it to then go find other bad actors. But it was the exact same engine. It was a natural language processing engine with two completely different use cases. One that was very government oriented, and so I liked that. I mean, I liked that was how we had built an engine that could be used in these very different scenarios. Yeah.
Yep. Any last remarks, Gene?
No, I think I think I got everything. Yeah, I think I'm good.
Cool. Yeah, some more will come of this last segment too. So we'll wrap it up here in the next 5 minutes. So this is a quick rapid fire Q&A, 5 seconds scramble. Try to rattle your answers in less than 5 seconds. Mike, why don't you lead with Gene, and then I will wrap with Jake.
All right. You ready to go, Jane?
Let's do it.
All right. So what's your favorite part of the culture at MIT?
The general leaning into the nerd culture. It is not a 4-letter word at MIT. This badge of honor.
Nice. What's something that surprised you about working with startups?
How bad scientists are at doing anything but science.
Yes. What's the most interesting piece of feedback you've received?
Oh my God. Interesting or hurtful?
Valuable. You can take it however you want.
Yeah. I think that I scare people when they meet me. That was probably the most useful.
That is hurtful.
Useful. Yes. No, that was useful.
Oh, that's useful.
Yeah. No, it's good to know. What's one startup myth you wish to debunk?
That it's fun.
In retrospect, I find it fun in retrospect, not while I'm living it.
In retrospect, it's a ton of fun. During, it's
brutal.
Depressing.
It's all kinds of emotions. Anyway, we'll move on. What's an emerging market or sector that you think is underrated?
I just got back from Ukraine, so I'm going to say the future of warfare. It's a little bit of a teaser, but there's some really interesting stuff going on.
It's cool. Topic for a different day, maybe. If you could have 1 hour with any tech leader, dead or alive, who would it be?
Oh, man. I mean, it's. I think it's a little cliche, but it would have to be Steve Jobs because I want to debunk the myth and get to the reality. So I would just love to spend an hour and get to and walk out of there going, that was all bullshit. He's complete. It was just luck.
Nice. What did you want to be when you grew up?
I wanted to be an Apache pilot in the Army, but they wouldn't take me at West Point, so I had to go to the Air Force. Don't tell them I said that.
Don't tell who? Air Force?
Yes, the Air Force.
What's one place you visited that you'd really like to go back to?
Probably Tel Aviv. I've only been once.
What's a charity or corporate philanthropy that's near and dear to you?
Well, I had a nonprofit in DC called The Find. It was kind of to bring the intelligence community and small businesses together. So that's near and dear because I still am very close to it. So if anything, it would be that.
Cool. What's the most controversial food combination you like or dislike?
Oh, that's a good one. I love beef tongue. I was born in the Soviet Union, so there's some delicacies there that Americans would severely run away from. So
we would just throw some ranch on it and be fine.
You can throw ketchup on some beef tongue, but a nice good beef tongue is delicious. Trust me on this.
All right. And last one, what's a mythical creature you wish actually existed?
This is great. Mythical creature. I'm gonna have to think about this one. I haven't thought about it many. I mean, the things that come to mind are just too cliche. So I gotta get a better answer. So I'm gonna pass on this one and think of it towards the end of the. I'll give Jake a chance to go.
Okay, that sounds great. I love your dedication to a good answer for this one.
Yeah.
Doesn't everybody say dragons? Like that's just like the first thing that pops into like your uniform.
Cliche.
Yeah, but do you actually want them to exist? I mean,
no. Maybe a narwhal. Narwhals are those mythical?
Those are real.
That actually exists. That's where unicorn horns came from. Anyway, we can make more. We can make
where unicorn horns come from. All right, Jake, you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. If Marque Ventures were an animal, what animal would it be and why?
It's a good question. I'm going to go with a wolf because the wolf pack is very important. So good, like family team dynamics. Everything works when the team works together and we're out there hunting.
Nice. Wolf pack. Like it. What is your favorite stage of startup to invest in?
Yeah, man, pre-IPO, but I want to get in real early. So we'll like seed stage pre-IPO, just as long as I know that it's going there.
What's a recent win at Marque that made everyone celebrate?
It's probably a fundraising win for us that we'll talk about later.
Cool. What are the top tech roles that you're seeing your portfolio hiring most of today?
I mean, everybody needs, just great engineers. Most of what we're investing in are hardware meets software, some combination. I think, VP of engineering, always really hard to hire. Just that one, as the kids these days say, cracked engineer to manage the rest of the team. But
what's an emerging market or sector that you think is underrated?
I think anything in the kinetic space. So stuff that goes boom. A lot of folks don't want to touch it, but super important right now. Energetics, both what goes boom and what makes the things that go boom get there faster, more efficiently.
What's a charity or corporate philanthropy that's near and dear to you?
Let's see. Probably my daughter's circus school where she goes and does classes, right? Like it's the thing that's close to home.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah. How do you balance high stress decision making with personal well-being?
Alcohol.
appreciate the candor.
Yeah.
No. Great family, great team. Walking the dog.
Yeah, and alcohol
And
on the
alcohol.
couch with a good war movie.
That's right.
Yeah. What tech pioneer do you think would be the most fun at a party?
I'll go back to the dead instead of the living, and I'm going to go with like someone like Oppenheimer or Ernest Lawrence or Vannevar Bush or Alfred Loomis, like one of that ilk.
Cool. What's the worst fashion trend that you've ever followed?
Probably like the startup hoodie thing, like what I'm wearing today. Yeah. I own it.
Yeah. What's a hobby that you've picked up that's out of character for you?
Blacksmithing.
Oh, that's a good answer.
That's a good answer.
And then last one, what was your dream job as a kid?
President, for sure.
Nice.
I wanted to be there. Now I don't know.
When are we going to see you on Forged in Fire?
Oh, I am nowhere. I don't know if you can see me, but I've got there's a boarding axe back there, and that a friend made, and a swag and a sword and a couple knives. But I am so slow. I would never ever be successful on that show.
Nice.
All right, and we have to close with Gene. Gene, what's that mythical creature?
I'll admit I went to the internet for this to get an exhaustive list of mythical creatures. No, this was important. I had to make sure I didn't get this one wrong. So I chose the Kraken because how cool it would be to actually in real life yell "Unleash the Kraken" and then have it rise and take a Chinese fleet out. That would be pretty amazing.
This is Gene is not a sailor. I don't think any of the Navy guys would be like, oh yeah, I wish there were Kraken floating around.
Right. I mean, only for the other navies, not our Navy.
Yeah, the other navies. Good stuff.
Nice.
All right, that's a
Like
wrap, guys.
right.
Appreciate you guys spending time with us. Thanks for your thoughts on dual use. Obviously top of mind right now in our ecosystem. And thanks for joining us on the pod.
Thanks for having us.